Welcome to the Becoming a Pilot podcast, where we share first-hand experiences, practical advice, and insights from pilots at every stage of their journey. I'm your host, Dave Angus, and whether you're just starting out or working towards your next rating, we're here to help you navigate the path to becoming a pilot. So buckle up, stay tuned, and let's talk all things aviation.
This podcast is brought to you by Genesis Flight College, Canada's premier flight center. With an advanced fleet of Diamond aircraft and experienced instructors, Genesis Flight College provides top-tier training in the heart of southern Georgian Bay. Ready to start your journey to becoming a pilot? Inquire today.
Welcome back to the Becoming a Pilot podcast. My name is Dave, and we have Tyler back with us today to talk about forced approaches. Right?
Right. Yeah, forced approaches.
So what is a forced approach?
Well, forced approach is essentially an engine failure that's well managed in order to land the aircraft safely on the ground.
Right, and that would be, I'm assuming, not on an airport.
Right. Field usually, if you can make an airport, bonus, but
that would be nice. Mm-hmm. Actually making an airport, that was my commercial flight test. And it was pretty funny because so the examiner had us strategically maneuver near one.
Yeah.
And right away I went, oh, okay, yeah, we got the airport.
Yeah.
He's like, perfect, great choice. Mm-hmm. So I go through everything that we'll discuss and how we do the forced approach, and I'm on final. And normally you're waiting for the instructor to be like, great, everything's good. You do your final shutdown check. Good job.
Yeah.
Overshoot. And I hear nothing. And I'm getting closer to the ground. It's like, obviously I've landed a million times and it's okay. I know how to do it.
Yeah.
But I'm just waiting. So, you're going to overshoot? No, you're going to land. It's a forced approach. You lost an engine.
Right.
And immediately, I think I was drenched head to toe in sweat.
Yeah.
Like, just so nervous, even though it's something that you've done a million times.
Right.
And anyways, it all worked out well. But yeah, it could be on airport or off airport. But unfortunately,
That's a curveball, though.
Oh my gosh.
I've done that with students before where strategically you put them close, and because they're so used to looking out for fields, they don't even clue into the fact that there's a perfectly good runway right there.
Yeah.
So they go through all the planning and procedure, and then I'm like, so that's the field you want to choose? They're like, yep, that's the best field. We're close. It's long, perfect. I'm like, okay, look to your right. Oh, there's a runway right there?
Nice.
Let's go for that.
Let's do it. Yeah. I always like to bring up the Gimli glider.
Yeah. We use that in our PJS, right? So
yeah, it's a good one. It's a really cool kind of real world application of rudimentary flight training principles, right? Because that was just a big side slip, right all the way down.
yeah.
So yeah. Anyways, so we're talking about forced approaches. Where do we start? So we've lost our engine.
Yeah, immediately pitch up, get your best glide. So with the airspeed, typically it's going to be, quite a bit faster than your glide speed. So if you pitch up, then you can gain a little bit altitude. Altitude is your best friend in this type of situation. So for us, that 76 at max gross is what you're aiming for, and just trim it off, get that really fine tuned, because you want to have that best glide to get your most distance, right? So and then, so then you're picking your best field, right? So you want to go through what we call the COWLS check. So sea civilization, you don't want to be landing on top of civilization or, potentially causing a hazard to anybody on the ground, but you want to pick somewhere that's close enough. So if you need to get help afterwards, that somebody's close by. Obstructions, which you want to make sure that the fields, your approach path doesn't have too many obstructions. So power lines, consider trees, anything like that. The field itself, is free of debris and, rocks or farm equipment potentially.
Cows.
Cows.
Horses in this area.
Hay bales, right?
Yeah.
Cow eggs, as one of my students say also. And then wind direction. Wind direction is important because we want a headwind on landing. So there's a couple of ways to decide on wind direction. Best methods, I would say, is using smoke if it's available. Solar direction, wind turbines. Wind turbines will always kind of give you that wind direction because they're always blowing into wind, right?
Right.
So And then you can use the G1000 for the wind as well, although it does tell you upper winds at the current altitude. As you descend, they back and veer, or they back and yeah. So that's wind, and then length. Obviously, you want a long enough field to land in.
Sure.
And then surface conditions. So that's kind of, making sure that plow furrows, like the dips in the field, are in the direction you're going to land. And, ideally shorter vegetation.
Right.
But yeah, that's planning the field. So you kind of do that within a split second, kind of make a decision within, the first 10 seconds as you look around to pick what field's most suitable. And and then you continue on from there, planning the actual approach.
Right. Now you were saying there, so we look for smoke. That's obviously great. I remember when I was first taught there, like look at the rippling in the grass.
Yeah.
Right. Now that'll tell you. And I've always, I don't know, maybe people have better vision than me.
Right.
It seems like every time I go to the eye doctor, they say I got great vision, but I don't know how the heck you're gonna see grass ripples or ripples in the water.
Right.
Like, I always love when they say, yeah, look at the water. I'm like, yeah, we'll look at Wasaga Beach where the waves are always coming this way. You're telling me the wind is always coming here?
Yeah, exactly.
It's today, for instance, it's going the opposite way. Right. So that doesn't work.
Yeah. No, not
so I think exactly what you said. Windmills, if you're out in the Shelburne area, or if you're in an area that has those wind turbines.
Yep.
Or the best thing is smoke. And then if all else fails, what runway did you take off?
Exactly.
Like all else, like chances are, in general aviation aircraft, unless you're doing some massive cross country, we fly 25, 50 miles from home at most, 95% of the time. So wind's not going to change that much. Although here, who knows? It's a different climate between Wasaga Beach, Elmville, Muskoka, Wyerton.
It could change
but
it's not going to be a 180 reversal.
And the thing is, ultimately, at the end of the day, you've lost your engine.
Yeah.
If you end up choosing incorrectly, but you've tried to make the most educated, decision, then you're landing with a tailwind. Like you have no, like, so what can we do, right? You just have to use that pilot skill to now be able to just land in a tailwind, right?
Right. You'll take up more,
you'll take up more real estate, but that's it. Yeah. You're gonna have a little less lift, or that feeling, right? You're gonna feel like you're pushed down, right? So you're not gonna have that wind that's kind of holding you up. But I think at the end of the day, it's just you're gonna have you're gonna eat up more of the runway length, right?
Yeah.
I always say when you're talking about the COWLS check and talking about picking the field, so take out of the consideration that there's a runway nearby that's perfect.
Yeah.
I always say find the biggest field around.
Yeah.
People try so hard to look at, which one is the perfect field. Just get the longest field.
Yeah.
Right? The longest one that you can see. And even if it's going to give you a crosswind, we can land in a crosswind.
Definitely.
It's fine.
It's manageable.
Right? But instead they'll pick a 2,000-foot field because it's perfectly into the wind.
Yeah.
And then if your approach isn't perfect, you just failed the evolution.
Right.
And you've gotten a 1 on the marking scale and the flight test, and your flight test has to be redone. Right? Pick the longest field. We can land in a crosswind. It's no problem. Right? And then go from there. Okay? Which way we're going to talk about how we plan it. What would be our best plan of attack? How are we going to lose the most altitude and best amount of time? Like all that, we can get into that. But pick the longest field. That's always my thing. So we've done our COWLS check. You talked about that civilization, land closer to a city as opposed to somewhere that's completely removed from everywhere. Someone's gonna have to come and get you.
Right.
Ain't flying out of there. So
that's right.
So we've picked a good field, and now we're gonna execute it. How do we do this?
Right. So we teach our students the ABC, DEFs, right?
Nice.
So we got through the A and the B. So airspeed, best field using the COWLS check. Now it's the CAWS check. So that's your emergency checklist, which should be all done from memory.
Right.
So we go through all those items, trying to restart the engine. Right. If that's unsuccessful, we've already picked our field. And at this point, before we actually get to the CAWS checks, we should have picked out or planned the approach. So that's using 2 methods. The circuit method, which everyone's familiar with because they land at an airport and use that method all the time. or the 360 method. So if you have lots of altitude to spare, 360 method could be the better option.
Sure.
High wind days, maybe the circuit method, even if you have lots of altitude. The cause checks are done, and then you're moving on to the distress call. You want to get a call out to let somebody know that you have had an engine failure and that you're doing a forced approach.
So let's go back to the cause check just for a second. I want to touch on that.
Yeah.
So we have our checklist that covers everything, and it's very specific. It's very good. You should know that. I always try to teach my students to do what we know, right? It's a panic situation, right? And what do we do a million times is the downwind check. And I know it seems silly.
Yeah.
But I go through that because it's what we know, and we can do it. Every student,
Right.
especially by the time they're getting flight test ready, can rhyme that thing off like no problem.
Yeah.
And it's just like a T-flow, right? Light, master, mags, fuel pump, bond, engine gauges in the green, circuit breakers are all in. We come down and check the fuel in the full tank.
Yeah.
Done.
It's essentially this.
Right? And that's pretty much what the checklist says.
Yeah, there's a couple extra items that.
But I always say, like, I know it seems dumb that we even check the lights, but it's what we know. Do what we know, because as soon as we start changing things and then you're panicked, when was the last time you actually did an emergency procedure in an emergency?
Right.
So now, did I get everything in that checklist? And then your focus just kind of goes out the window. So I just do a quick flow, lights, masters, mags, fuel pump on, engine gauges in the green, circuit breakers are all in, make sure it's full rich, fuel in the full tank.
Yep.
Done, cause check's done, and we can move on, right? And then we add in the alternate air, but
And the mags.
yes,
Yeah.
but again, it's a modified downwind check is how I teach it.
Yeah.
Maybe some people don't agree with that because it's not exactly what the POH says.
Right.
But it does hit everything that the POH.
Yeah, I think that's
It's just a little bit more.
That's important to note that you're covering all your bases there, and you're hitting pretty much all of them, right? And it's something that doesn't have to be overly complicated,
Right.
and as long as you're getting through them all in a timely manner.
Yeah.
Like a lot of students practice it on the ground, but then when you're in the plane and you're giving them the scenario, their mind goes blank.
Oh, it's gone.
Yeah.
It's gone. I always give the example. I had a student, really smart guy,
Yeah.
and we were up there doing time turns. Okay.
Yeah.
And he went to do his math, and it was, I think we were at 90, and he was doing the 10% plus 7 and all that. And then it was like 9 plus 7. He's like, all right, 13 degrees. And I was like, check your math.
Right.
Right? Yeah, 13. I was like, check your math again, right? Oh, 14. Sorry, I was wrong. I have control. I take control. I was like, what's 9 plus 7? Oh, 16. Great. You have control, right?
Let's go.
So it's funny how as soon as but you get task saturated, right? And especially you throw an emergency in there. And, like we've said in previous episodes and stuff, like that's why pilots are paid the way they are, is because they have that responsibility of being able to make those decisions in those hard times.
Right.
So we do that cause check. And another thing to just kind of touch back on the cause check there. One thing to always look at as well is chances are if you lost your engine, and it wasn't some catastrophic blew a line, there's oil everywhere, there's fire, whatever.
Yeah.
Chances are it was the last thing that you did that caused that.
Yeah.
Maybe we just switched the fuel tanks and now the engine died.
Right.
Probably have a blockage or something wrong, maybe out of fuel in that one.
Yeah.
So it's not a bad idea to just go back to what you just did and reverse it, right? I've always taught that with flaps, right? You put the flaps down, keep your hand there for a second, because the airplane starts doing an uncommanded roll. We've had asymmetric flap extension, get the flaps back up, right? There's been many accidents with asymmetric flap extension. So that's how we eliminate it, right? Put them down, airplane starts turning and you didn't want it to,
Right.
goes back up, right? Yeah. So we've done our cause check and we've had no restart. We got to continue from there. And you said we are going to declare an emergency.
Right.
Where do we declare that emergency? If we're like let's say we're in our scenario here, we're on 122.85, which is the local frequency here. And where do we do that emergency call?
Ideally, 121.5, right?
Right. Who's listening to that though?
London FIC.
Hopefully. They should be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, we would declare it on that. I mean, if all else fails on the local frequency,
Right.
usually somebody's going to hear that. There's a number of airports,
Right.
and a number of pilots that could potentially be flying, but ideally, 121.5.
Yeah, I would say like we're lucky here. There's so much traffic. If I do a Mayday call on 122.85, someone's going to hear it, whether it be Midland Unicom, whether it be the grounds guys here, or other planes, someone's going to hear it. We also have the option of Toronto, because over 3,000 feet here is Class E airspace, and we have we're radar. We have radar coverage here. They can probably see us based on our situation, but they can definitely hear us. So we could even call Toronto if all else fails, right?
Yeah.
So they're definitely going to see our 7,700 that we'll talk about later on that we're
control.
Yeah. So they should see us. We're above 3,000 feet, and be able to just kind of give a geographical location. But they're also equipped with the knowledge of what to do. And that's a big thing. We've had a couple of Mayday calls on our frequency, and then everything's worked out fine. But let's say that you made a call on Toronto and you're going to be going down the field and you're injured now, right? They at least know, okay, where you are and then what to do. And that would be to let Trenton know, and then they can send search and rescue, emergency services, all that. They have their protocols.
Right.
So they're kind of the experts, right? So I always like to tell students as well, like, utilize that. Yeah. It's easy to remember the one frequency, 124.025. That's in our area here. That's Toronto.
Yeah.
Use them too. If it's a little less urgent, maybe we just call on local frequency. So yeah, we got options, but those are kind of the three big options. 121.5 is your test mark, right? That's that's the protocol.
Right.
126.7, I would not even bother.
Don't worry about that.
No one's listening and no one cares, unfortunately. 124.025 for Toronto, and then local, right? All those ones are all great options and all very viable, right? So we declare our emergency, and then we kind of briefly talked on 7,700. What is that?
Yeah, so that's your emergency transponder code that you want to set in if you're in controlled airspace. You would set 7,700. Not a bad idea to do it in uncontrolled as well.
Yeah, why not?
As much make yourself as known as possible, right? You have an emergency. So the ELT comes on. Yeah. We usually brief that in a passenger brief, which comes after the Mayday call. So that's the D, distress call, and then the emergency passenger brief comes after that. So you want to brief your passengers, let them know what's happening, calm them down if they're, really nervous and scared. Let them know that you've practiced this many times. Hopefully you have throughout your training, and you want to let them know where you're going to land and what's going to happen after you land.
Sure.
Tell them to remove any sharp objects so that on landing they don't injure themselves, have a bit it goes wrong. And then let them know that we're going to meet 100 feet behind the tail once we're down, and then to put that ELT on.
Yeah.
The electronic locator transmitter, so that signal gets sent out, and it should activate on its own, but for redundancy we turn it on and activate it. And then if they're still freaking out, then you can give them a minor task to occupy their mind. So read out the altimeter every 500 feet.
I always say, give them the checklist. Right. Everyone can, well, not everybody, but most people can read. Right. So give them the checklist, right? And also, it removes some of that task saturation for you, and it gives them something to do. And people just naturally have this calming effect when they feel like they're in control, right? I always talk about my mom. She has this huge fear of flying, and back many, many years ago, Air Canada used to have a fear of flying course.
Right.
And you would go in, you would learn about everything, you'd meet the pilots, and the grand finale is you would go for a flight. I think it was Toronto to Montreal.
Okay.
But you would rotate through sitting in the jump seats, and you would sit up in the front. And it was just to show you what is going on, right? And she said that when they took off and she was in the back, she was horrified. And that hasn't changed. But when she went up and sat in the FOC, she immediately felt calm.
Right.
And it's this weird sensation of that I'm in control, when really there's 0% chance that she would ever be able to successfully and safely land that airplane. No chance, zero.
Yeah.
But we have this weird innate feeling in us that is we're in control. So you give them that task, say, read this checklist.
Yeah.
right, and make sure that we've done everything right, they're going to have that comfort feeling.
Right.
But at the very least, they're distracted, hopefully.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And you touched on about making sure that you take off, a sharp objects or anything like that. That's mostly because like it's an unprepared surface. It's going to be, it'll be rough, even though we can land, any of these general aviation airplanes can land to no problem in these fields.
Yeah.
There's a couple of variables. One, it's going to be rough. It's going to be bumpy. That's fine. But at this time of year, it's starting to get a little bit better, but the ground's pretty soft, right?
I dig in.
So we might dig in.
Might flip over.
Chances of flipping over are higher than normal. And we don't have the ability to soften that landing with a little bit of power, right? Or something like that.
Yeah. Yes, that's a good point. You want to find them of the emergency exits as well on the back. You did brief on takeoff, prior to takeoff.
Well, because every plane's a little bit different. Like the Diamond, the canopy comes up, right? And you think of like a Cessna, they're doors. So the door can get jammed, but upside down, as long as it's not on its side, which would be pretty tough to happen.
Right.
The door can still open, right? So that's why we would always just pop those doors, right? We'd still pop our canopy, but if we're upside down, doesn't matter what you've done, it's not opening, right? So we have to look at the emergency exit, which we have in the back, right? So yeah, what you were talking about briefing, and I always talk about with students that everything that we do in aviation, from the time you start to the end, you brief everything that you're going to do, and it gets even more so the deeper that you get into it, right? So whether that be briefing a passenger, very simple things, I always say be your best flight attendant, right? Or you're briefing a pilot on an approach and being more technical, we're always briefing what we're going to do so that everyone's on board or what's going on, right? Yeah. So we've done our emergency passenger brief. Passenger is now feeling good because they know you've got this under control. You got this. Yeah. And now what?
So then, you're flying the plane the whole time while you're doing all these checks. Ideally, engine warms every 500 feet to avoid shot cooling the engine, especially in wintertime conditions. But the final shutdown is the F, right? So you did the emergency passenger brief, the E. So now it's F, final shutdown. So all your red, your fuel, shut your fuel selector off, your mixture oil cut off, then your mags off, then finally your electrical off. To avoid any potential for an electrical fire on landing, right, or any ignition of the fuel. So, but you want to wait. You want to get your flaps down completely, and any last final calls.
Yeah, I was gonna say what was the kind of like the importance of that, and you're right. Like our flaps are all electrically actuated, right? So if we turn off the power, we can't lower the flaps. Again, we want to revert back to whatever the POH says, because everyone's airplane, they may not be training on those. And you know, when I did my training in a Seminole, it was kind of the e-brake style, right?
Okay.
So it was McCarry. You'd shut that off at any time. Didn't matter, right?
Right.
But you would lose the communications, right? So we want to try to stay in communication as long as possible. The more information that we can give to search and rescue, the better, right? We talked a little bit about post-impact fire there, which is obviously a real concern. That's one of the nice things with Diamond, actually, is they're well known for the construction of their fuel tanks. I don't know if you knew this. Their fuel tanks are made in such a way that it lessens the chance of a post-impact fire in that situation.
Okay.
It's kind of cool. So
I did not.
Really super strong reinforced tanks. Yeah. So that's kind of one of their claims to fame.
Okay.
But nonetheless, if you rip a wing off, it's not gonna do too much.
No, it's not gonna.
So we've done that. We've executed that. We've done our forced approach. As far as the flight test goes, what do we need? What benchmarks do we need to hit to achieve that level 4, that 4 grade on the flight test?
Right. So flight test is into 2 different categories.
Okay.
There's the management side of things and the control side of things. So management would be your cockpit checks that you go through all those. And then the control check is the marking criteria for that is that you make the field in the first third.
Right.
So how do we do that? Well, we want to plan the approach back to the B of the whole forced approach. your best field, then you're choosing the approach. So the 360 method or the circuit method, and you want to manage your altitude the best you can. So you want to hit certain keys. So your high key, your low key, your final key, and those are kind of altitude checks, right?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of like also based on your aircraft, right? Like we've got our numbers that work for the Diamond, but if you fly in any other airplane, doesn't matter. Those altitudes are going to be different. Right? What I can do at our glide ratio, because our planes are essentially gliders with an engine.
Yeah,
that's what they were designed after.
pretty much.
And I try to do the same thing in, let's say, a Piper. They're going to have totally different glide ratios, and those numbers aren't going to work. So I don't want to say too much of like hit this altitude at this point, but it's very specific to your airplane. And I always just say base it off of kind of like your circuit, right? Try to fly. I kind of gravitate towards the circuit method for private pilot to get used to it. Then once you can start judging, can I get into 360? 360, I love the 360 method. But I should like back to what we were talking about with the COWLS check. What you know, we know circuits.
Right.
Whether you know right-hand circuit, left-hand circuit, fly it. Fly whatever you know, right? And then, like you were saying, hit those key points. So we always say, 45 degrees off of your touchdown point.
Yeah.
We're going to pick a key point. And we're going to pick an altitude. And we know what we need to be in our airplane, but whatever airplane, you got to pick what that is and figure that out. And we want to hit that altitude by that point. Now, if we're too high at that point, doesn't mean I'm going to continue flying away from my touchdown point per se. Maybe I need to. But what options can I have at that point to lose altitude quicker?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's three main things that you can utilize for a quicker descent. One's power, which we don't have. Yeah. So that one's out. Flaps would be the second. You want to be careful how early you deploy the flaps.
Sure.
But takeoff flaps, usually you would deploy at that point. And then you can utilize a slip as well.
Right.
So a turning slip, forward slip.
Yeah.
You can utilize those. You do S turns on the kind of base leg or trying to stay away from the field. Give yourself a little space. You don't want to crowd the field too much, but you also, like you said, you don't want to extend out and get too far away. And especially with stronger winds, you want to incorporate those winds and think about each leg and each turn of your forced approach, how the winds are going to affect that approach, right?
That's a big one to win that a lot of people forget about. They're high. Let's say it's a day like this where we have, 20 knot winds, just say. And at altitude, we know on some days like this, it's much higher, 30, 40 knot winds, right? So if we have a tailwind and it's pushing us quite quick, even though we're holding our airspeed fine, and now we're high at our key point, when we turn on to final, we've now hit a brick wall, and we're gonna lose that altitude quite fast. So I like what you said of don't overcommit, right? I always say get on the final, figure it out, right? Get on the final, take a look. Okay, now the winds are all in check. I'm lined up. Yeah, I'm high. My aiming point now looks way down the runway, or my aiming point here is now dropping in my windshield, right? So now I've got to do something. Add flaps, add a slip, whatever. Now we can start adding those things in, create more drag or create more space is really that's the only options that we have.
Right.
Get that key point, which is the threshold of our field, set it on our windscreen, and then keep it there.
Yeah.
If it's moving up, we got to figure something out. If it's moving down, we got to S-turn, deploy more drag, whatever.
Yeah.
So let's say we have that situation where it's now moving up. The reference point's moving up in the windscreen, telling us that we're going to be short. What could we do in that scenario? Let's say we're in, let's say we have flaps deployed, and we're not talking now like flight test. We don't want to get into this situation at all.
Yeah. Right.
We're talking real world. Okay. We've got full flap deployed. We definitely put it in too early, and now we're going to be short.
Yeah.
What could we do?
Well, you can consider other options. Is there any other suitable landing surface left or right of you?
Yeah.
You can't pull up because you're going to stall. You're at your glide speed, so pulling up would be dangerous. So there's quite limited options at that point.
Yeah, it definitely can be. We could. So what would be the disadvantage of retracting the flaps?
So because you have that drag there, retracting the flaps isn't really going to help you much at all.
Yeah, it might not give us too much.
Yeah, it's not going to increase.
We're going to have an initial loss of altitude, albeit pretty minor in these planes.
Right.
But the bigger the plane, the more you're going to lose on that. So we're going to have a sudden loss of altitude, which is going to take away from it.
Yeah.
And then the only other thing that we could try to do is try to create more energy at that point then, which would be increasing the airspeed. But the only way we could do that is put the nose down.
Yeah.
So we're going to lose more altitude. But it's an interesting one I like to go through with my students whenever I do it is get them into that scenario where they're going to be short and then just try things. Yeah, in the flight test, like you don't want to start changing things. But if you're going to miss the field, you might as well try something.
Yeah, you could put the flaps past takeoff.
Like you could try, because we know in our airplane, the takeoff flap is not too much of a detriment.
Yeah.
The landing flap really drops us.
Right.
So maybe tossing it back up might buy us that little extra real estate, right? A little less drag.
Not bad.
So just things to try. And like I said, in regards to the flight test, yes, we don't want to change configurations, but if you're not going to meet the field, you're not going to pass it anyways.
Right.
So you might as well try. Maybe the examiner will say, good decision on doing that, and now you hit the field.
Yeah.
Right? So we don't want to get to that point, but...
Yeah, I mean, being that low, bringing the flaps up, it might bite you a little bit, but if you're too low...
you're...
But the more risk would be obstructions at that point. Right, you're going to land short of your field. It's probably going to be some trees, potentially hydro.
Especially around here,
Yeah. So, I mean, you can consider roads or anything left or right of you, but...
So what I'm gathering from all this is you'd rather be high than low.
Definitely.
Yeah. I always say it's money in the bank, right? Having altitude is just money in the bank. Right. We can get rid of that real easy. It's flight training. We can get rid of money really quick.
Yeah, but like back to what we were saying is you want to hit that high, low key, final key.
Right.
You want to check your altitudes consistently throughout the approach. And the best thing you can do is hit that glide speed, hold that glide speed, and then continue through your checks, but keep going back to the approach. Keep assessing your approach path. Keep an eye on the edge of the field, your touchdown point, and that should serve you well in a successful forced approach.
So nice, perfect. So forced approaches in the field, right? We practice them a lot, and I know for myself and yourself, probably feel pretty confident if we had to do that. But it just takes repetition, right? We've done it a lot.
Yeah.
One thing that I want to quickly touch on, it's a huge topic, and I'd love to hear what like listeners and other students think of it as well, is the dreaded impossible turn, right? And that is we've taken off and we've lost an engine. So we always brief that, below a certain altitude, we're going to land within 30 degrees, either side, left, right, and just land straight ahead.
Yeah.
But what about turning back?
Yeah.
Right? When can we do that? Is it ever safe? It's called the impossible turn for a reason. Yeah. They did dub it that because it's possible all the time.
Yeah, fatality rates predict that executing a 180 degree turn back to the runway will likely result in a stall spin scenario.
Right.
So it's not safe to execute, but it has been successfully executed before. Right. There are videos of aircraft landing, maybe not on the runway, but they did turn back towards the airport environment, landed maybe off the runway to the side of the runway, and safely walked away from it. Likely it's going to result in an increase in stall speed in that turn, which is going to result in a low altitude stall.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Unrecoverable at that altitude, right? When we practice spins, we're
with an engine,
we're 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 feet up in the air, and we have lots of time to recover.
Right.
There's no chance at 1,000 feet or 500 feet at that, right? So what point would you say it's safe to turn around?
At circuit altitude.
So 1,000 feet?
Yeah, I would say you're likely going to be able to, as long as you keep the airspeed in a safe margin, around the glide speed. Based on the POH and that weight configuration of the day, and careful with the angle of bank, I think 1,000 feet would be sufficient.
Right.
Yeah.
But I fly a Cub or something. Great glide ratio.
Yeah.
Why can't I turn back 500, 400?
Yeah.
I can do it. I got it. I'm the man.
Right.
Why not?
Yeah. I mean, not advised, but you definitely try.
I think the biggest takeaway, and
Safer. You got to think about the most safe option.
Sure.
Right. So pick the decision that's going to give you the best overall chance of success. Right. So turning back to the field probably isn't the best option. So
Sure.
consider, if it was your loved one, what would you have them do?
Yeah.
You want to pick somewhere ahead, land in the field,
But maintenance is there. You know how much it's going to cost me to get it right field?
Yeah, well,
Take the wings off.
it's not your plane, so
What
insurance
company? What if it is? Yeah. Whenever the engine dies, I always say it's no longer your plane's the insurance
companies. Yeah, exactly.
So it is a good philosophy. But I don't want to be the guy that lands in the field. That's embarrassing.
Yeah, it is. But at least you had to go home and see your family.
Yeah, I think that's the best mentality looking at it. But I always like to have the discussion, especially in general aviation, because every plane is so different, right? We're not all flying the same plane. No. And every plane has a different glide ratio.
Mm-hmm.
So, going out and trying, 200 feet, let's kill the engine and turn back is probably not a smart idea.
Right.
But let's say doing it at altitude, right? Going to 3,000 feet, simulating a takeoff, pitch to whatever your climb out speed is of your aircraft, kill the engine, and see if you can get 180 degrees.
Yeah.
And remember, it's more than 180 degrees because if you just go 180 degrees, you're now in like a downwind position.
Yeah.
You got to come back.
Yes.
That's right. So you're kind of almost turning 270 degrees to get back to the runway. So try that at altitude. See if you can do it.
Yeah.
And maybe pick a fix, like a GPS fix, and that's your threshold or whatever.
Yeah.
But I know I've tried it on different airplanes and just to see and if we can do it. And make sure if you are going to try something like this that you're going to do it with an instructor.
Definitely.
At the very least, another pilot that can monitor the airspeed the entire time, because that is going to be everything. Or if you have an angle of attack indicator,
Angle check for sure.
always checking that stuff.
Yeah.
But maybe you could do it at 700. I think in our airplanes, you could probably closer to that 700 foot, but I wouldn't advise it to anybody, especially in the flight training environment.
Yeah.
Because you just don't have that proficiency with the airplane. And that's another big factor, right? There's so many factors that go into it. Do you have 10 hours in that airplane or do you have 1,000 hours in that airplane? Like, totally different. May not play a huge factor in some situations, but if you can hold that airspeed and that airplane, that's going to give you the best chance. So I think the thing that we have to remember with it is, why is it called the impossible turn, right? It wasn't just dubbed that because someone was just decided to call that because it's catchy.
Right.
It's because the statistics show that is where you're going to have a stall spin situation, and you're like, that is the number one situation where you're going to have a stall spin situation. Because you've taken off, you're at a high nose up attitude, 5-10 degrees roughly. Now your engine has failed. You've immediately lost that power. You give yourself 3 seconds to now figure out what's going on, get your nose down, get your best glide. You've already now traveled far enough away. So less than 1,000 feet is just not worth it. But I know a lot of people have different opinions on it, and I think that also comes from what airplane you're flying and your proficiency in that airplane. That's a huge thing. So
we practice in the commercial training environment. We practice power off 180s. We know that 1,000 feet is going to work. Right. So if you're below that, probably not advisable, right?
And it's still not an easy maneuver to be.
No, it's
to be precise.
Precise, exactly.
Right. Yeah. So. Awesome. Well, I appreciate it, Tyler. Thanks, buddy. Thanks for coming back on.
Yeah.
Sure, we'll keep bugging you and getting you out there for more.
Yeah.
All right.